After a career which has spanned over half a century and enjoyed international acclaim and respect from musicians and the general public alike, Don Van Palta, the Flying Dutchman, is the first person to be elected to the Hall of Fame in two different categories. In 2000, his contributions and accomplishments as a banjo player were recognized with his induction in the category of performance. Now, after inspiring and teaching hundreds of today's finest banjo players, Don Van Palta's lifelong efforts as a banjo teacher are acknowledged as he is inducted in the category of education and instruction. Born in Holland in 1932, Donald W. Van Wolfden Palta recalls his earliest musical memory being the image of his father singing him to sleep while playing a tenor guitar. The serenity of this scene was shattered 7 years later when his parents were divorced, just as World War II broke out in Holland. One of the bright memories of childhood, significant as the start of his lifelong love of music, was Don's acquisition of a ukulele, which he quickly taught himself to play. World War II became an unpleasant yet routine fact of life for Don's family, even as his mother and brother Willard were forced to move from their home in The Hague. While Don's mother desired to move her family to the United States, the lack of necessary paperwork forced them to remain in Holland for the next 5 years. When the war finally ended, Don chanced to see a film which featured British entertainer George Formby playing seductive rhythms and melodies on his banjo ukulele. This was Don's first exposure to the banjo, and he was taken, in his words, hook, line, and sinker. Following a hard crossing of the Atlantic, offset by the site of the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor, Don's family made their way to Sacramento, California. An admitted nonconformist, Don felt he didn't fit in with the other kids and took refuge in his music. Remembering George Formby, he went out and bought a tenor banjo from a pawn shop window. In an ironic turn, it was his ability to play that banjo that found Don being embraced by fellow students as he became part of a high school Dixieland jazz band. After being inspired by the flashy runs of a professional plectrum banjo player named Scotty Doggett, Don started to learn the plectrum banjo as well. A long and frustrating search for a good instructor eventually led him to an ex-vaudeville banjoist named Ray Ball, who took Don under his wing, helping him to learn what he needed to know and helping unlearn many of the bad habits he'd already developed on his own. With Ray Ball's instruction and guidance, Don was prepared when banjo fate came calling. In 1954, a young entrepreneur named Sherwood Johnson opened a pizza parlor named Shakey's in Sacramento, California. For the next 7 years, Don performed with piano player Willie Erickson in a duo known as the Fingerbusters. In addition to the standard sing-along repertoire, the duo worked up many complicated arrangements of non-banjo material, such as Oklahoma and Carmen. Such skillful banjo playing being displayed nightly, coupled with a shortage of qualified banjo teachers, found Don regularly getting asked to give banjo lessons. Recalling his own frustration prior to finding Ray Ball, he agreed, and in 1958, Don Van Palta began a teaching career which has grown and evolved for nearly 50 years. As the original banjo player at the first Shakey's Pizza Parlor, Don had already sealed himself a place in banjo history, but bigger things were on the horizon. A competing honky-tonk piano-playing businessman named Fred Sochi, who had maintained a friendly rivalry with the Fingerbusters, had just married a beautiful flight attendant named Mickey and decided to open his own nightclub in San Diego called Mickey Finn's Speakeasy. Although banjoist Red Watson had originally been picked for the job, when he injured his wrist, Don was hired to fill in temporarily for the next 14 years. During those years with the Mickey Finn Show, Don Van Palta, perched atop the piano with his famous horn-rimmed glasses, became a fixture in the nightclub performances which entertained over 3 million guests and was featured on Mickey Finn Records, which sold hundreds of thousands of copies, as well as the NBC television series, which brought the Mickey Finn Show to further millions of fans across the United States. After filling in at shows for Eddie Peabody following the famed banjoist's death in 1970, Don saw great potential as a soloist. So when the Mickey Finn Show moved on to continued success in Las Vegas, Van Palta decided to stay in San Diego, where he would continue to teach while he developed a solo act. Having left a regular paycheck behind and having trouble finding bookings, times were financially tough for Don. One day, while leafing through a music magazine, he saw an ad for guitar lessons by cassette tape and immediately thought, I can do that for the banjo. As he waited for his ship to come in as a performer, Van Palta developed his first series of instructional cassettes and booklets. Incorporating the one-on-one teaching techniques he'd used with great success during the previous 12 years, the series became very popular, particularly among aspiring banjoists in areas where qualified banjo teachers simply did not exist. During the intervening years, the library of Don Van Palta instructional materials, evolving with the demands of his students as well as advances in technology, has grown to include dozens of methods in printed, cassette, CD, and DVD formats, and found a worldwide audience, a market which was matched by the demand for the music itself of the Flying Dutchman, delivered to fans around the globe on several popular LP and CD recordings. Don's performing ship did come in, quite literally, as for almost 15 years he had become a well-known headline performer aboard luxury cruise ships. Playing on his country of birth and his Flying Dutchman nickname, Don's solo act incorporated his music along with Dutch dialect comedy. Although bookings were now abundant, downtime aboard ship was long and boring. Don found salvation when laptop computers came along, allowing him to use the new technology to convert idle hours into productive time, as he arranged dozens of great old songs into plectrum banjo solos. Through his entire career, Don Van Palta has developed an unwavering reputation of honesty, integrity, and quality. His instruction of over 1,000 students in 12 countries has also created a banjo legacy which will ensure that the music of the Flying Dutchman will live on for generations yet to come.